Hello and welcome back inside the Parc Fermé for podcast number 776, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix review. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now!
AKA Negative Camber. You know why I've asked you here.
You must convince the villagers that I'm harmless.
That is exactly what I need you to do. Tonight, for your kind consideration, we're going to review the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in all of its glory. But of course, before doing that, I have to introduce my co-host, which of course means...
Wrecked from out of the wasteland. He's bad, he's beautiful, he's crazy. It's...
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Charles, the International.
Paul, how you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah, things are happening. Lots of races in the upcoming weeks. So I've been hard at it, actually. But I did squeeze the race in, as you always make me do.
Yes,
so
yes, right. That's always good. That's good.
Force me to watch the F1 race.
Did the number 23 Aston Martin this past week, did you find a new alternator?
Whereas the 27 needed the alternator.
The 27, okay.
We swapped it from the 23. Figure we put it on the healing shelf and then put it back on the other car. We figured that's probably work.
So we could just take this off this car and put it on this car and it'll work.
It'll be fine. Just fine. Yeah.
Just fine. Good.
No, the boys are hard at rebuilding those cars, which they need to happen. And it's a long trek for our next race out to Long Beach.
Yeah.
Not this weekend, next weekend. So, you gotta account for 5 days of travel, basically. So it's a bit of a squeeze, honestly, after a 12-hour race to get the cars turned around and ready to do the sprint race season.
Right. Yeah, get all the gear, the people, the resources, all that.
Yeah, make sure we don't screw it up this time.
Right.
Been a lot of that going on this week.
Been a lot of screwing up.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's exciting. I'll be watching.
You
big fan of Long Beach, you are, Paul.
I do. I think the event is great. The track is interesting enough, but it's got a lot of history and it's a fun area to be in. So it's one of the top races in the year, I would say. Certainly from the crowd, interaction, experience point of view. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a fun track, a bit like Saudi Arabia.
Not quite as quick and perilous, but still perilous.
Perilous, dangerous. Saudi Arabia, it's a death trap.
Yeah. There's hopefully no missiles fly over us, but you never know.
You never know.
East LA ain't far away, man.
That's right. You never know.
Yeah,
who knew? Well, speaking of that, Paul, of course, we're going to review the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And so since the race and really kind of percolating throughout the whole weekend, there was lots of commentary, lots of information. Look, as much as I appreciate the gravity of the situation, the political overtones, the whole Yemen-Saudi conflict, the attack that was 10 clicks away from the track, the human rights issues, that overarching notion of sports washing and everything, I'm not going to, and we're not going to wade into the debate on this podcast and offer some sort of half-baked opinion on the matter. There are plenty of podcasts and websites out this week offering commentary and morality debates about the situation. You can get all of your feel of politics there. The last thing you need is some sort of virtue signaling rant from me on how morally bankrupt a nation or a sport is. Meanwhile, my neighbor needs help and I can't be bothered to walk across the street to help him. So you don't need that from me. What I will say about the whole incident is that F1 has its choices and it has its decisions to make. And while money tends to fill this cavernous hole that is F1's soul, the sport should consider its evolution. It should consider its business model for revenue for itself and how the teams make money. In short, this debate may actually be less about morality and sports washing and more to do with the fundamental revenue model of F1 in general. Right. And look, big money has a big voice and yet it makes no sound. And in the end, one thing I think we all should know by now is that big money has no soul. Right. The only souls involved are the souls of those who have it and the souls of those who want it, and therein lies the big debate, and I will let you debate that on your own. So, having said that, Paul, let's
Yes.
get in to the race that
The
was the
nitty-gritty.
Saudi. Yes. The second fastest circuit on the Formula One calendar outside of Monza, right? The Temple of Speed. This is an incredibly fast street circuit, incredibly dangerous, as we saw on Saturday. We'll get into that in a moment when we review the teams. But here's what I want to lead off with, Paul. I want to ask you, let's talk about the regulations, 2022 regulations, the racing we've seen so far, and your friend and mine, DRS.
Yes.
Yeah.
Played a big part in the past couple of races.
Yes, it
in a
certainly
different way,
has.
but yes.
Yes. Did I mention DRS? Yeah, I did.
Well done, Ross Brawn. Yeah.
Yes, I did. So, at first blush, Paul, do you feel that the new regulations are working? Cars are able to, race closer without impacting the tire wear or deg as much as they have in the past? Do you feel like so far we're seeing these regulations play out?
Yeah, no, absolutely. On that side of things, it's absolutely quite significant, I would say. In fact,
Yeah.
how close some of these guys can get. But
Yeah.
obviously, we're it's also track dependent, right? So
Yeah.
things are still going to evolve as to what we're really going to see about it.
I think you're right. I think you're spot on. I think it's very track specific in how this plays out. But as they can race closer, it makes DRS a much more powerful tool. And depending on the zone length of DRS, I think this all of a sudden becomes kind of critical, and how many DRS zones there are at each track. And the location of that zone, I think all of a sudden it becomes not just powerful, it becomes very powerful.
Yeah. No, for sure. And the length of the DRS, they're always playing around with that. I'm not quite sure they haven't figured it out on their abacus how to actually keep it uniform from track to track, and how powerful or not powerful it's going to be. Obviously, the rules have evolved and things are a little different now, rightly so. They're closer to each other, so that when the DRS does activate, you're just closer, so it makes the pass easier to happen. So maybe that's why these games are playing on.
Do you think we're going to continue to see this DRS chess match, kind of at 150 miles an hour, going to play out pretty much the balance?
I think it's becoming a part of the game. As I said, I think on the last one is, I hate DRS, but if you're going to work it, then have it at every single straightaway. So at least there's an ability to fight back and fight back again and fight back again. I think ultimately what we saw at the end, the car with the biggest potential speed at the end of the race actually won the race. Although it was a pretty good fight to see them back and forth. But I'm not a big fan of DRS, obviously, but I think if you have enough DRS zones on the track, it nearly equals out and it makes it a bit more palatable. But I'd still rather not see it exist at all.
Yeah. It's a good point. So my next question for you on this subject is, do you think Max would have passed Charles without DRS and vice versa? I mean, in the past, we may have seen, or we may have gotten maybe that one pass, right? And then that was pretty much it. And it was a critical pass, and it was super awesome. I think of some of the past ones, like Mika Hakkinen and Schumacher splitting the car down Kemmel Straight, and and he put it in. It was the one pass, and it was pretty much, that was it. So in the past, we would have gotten this sort of one pass, and it was super exciting. But now we're getting this pass repass. Do you feel like without DRS, you feel like Max would have gotten that pass? Do you feel like Charles would have had an opportunity to get back by it? Or would have been one and done? Or do you think Max probably wouldn't have got by without DRS?
I think he would have got by, but I don't think obviously would have had the multi passes that we had. I mean, we've talked about it before. What is Formula One? Is it a soccer game where a 1-0 win can be one of the best games that you've ever seen? Or is it a basketball game where it's 98 to 96, all still ending up, all those baskets forward, did they really mean anything, or was it the last one that really meant something?
Right.
So we wouldn't see the multiple passes. I think ultimately Max would have found a way by Charles. I'm not sure Charles could have ever found a way back, but it's still track dependent, on this stuff. What leads after the pass, what corners lead up, how close are they on the exit? It's not, just a written in stone thing that Charles couldn't have made a repass. They were very close on pace, but ultimately, as the race wore on, it seemed the Red Bull was just a little bit stronger. So
yeah,
the jury's still out, honestly, for me. But I'm okay with there being one spectacular pass rather than 3 50% passes, because they are DRS activated. But not everyone's for that, and
I get it.
I find it difficult to believe that F1 would then start pulling back on this. I think they're more likely to eat into it, feed into, the DRS, everyone was up in the arms. There's a pass, there was a repass. They're now going to be looking at every track and seeing how they can simulate it again, as we saw with the HD tires that we saw first rise their head accidentally at Canada those years ago. And then they decided, well, let's just do this every race, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
I think you may see some changes in DRS zones and evaluations of them for future circuits, because I think they really probably want to reenact this kind of stuff.
Right. And it comes up to the point, as far as Leclerc, I read that he said that without the DRS at this point, with the new regulations and everything, he kind of feels like the racing be boring. He said, so, the new cars and DRS, it would be boring. And that, brings up the question, is this a perfect harmony between the new regulations, the new cars and DRS? Have they found this perfect balance? Do they need to tweak it a little bit? Charles says the cars are much better, but not good enough to do away with DRS.
Right. I mean, the one thing is, even in the old days of slipstreaming, you didn't remember the closest race in F1 history, I think it is, at least the top 5 were covered by half a second or something like that. You didn't want to be the first person leading the last lap, because you knew that the slipstream was going to work. So is DRS simulating the slipstream effect? Probably fairly, I've raced in races where you're just kind of hanging back and go, okay, this is when I'm going to make my move, and you plan it 2-3 laps ahead. With DRS, it seems you can plan it every lap nearly, but
Yeah. So, in the end, you think, what they may end up doing is sort of tweaking DRS zones, maybe having more DRS zones, and sort of like balancing that out a little bit this year.
I think if we can balance it out, I'm happier with that. I think they're going to change activation lines, etc., to try and instigate this kind of scenario, honestly.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's get in. Well, let us know what you guys think. Is this a great balance? Do you like the back and forth because of the DRS? Do you think it should be tweaked? I'm kind of with you, Paul. I kind of think, if we're going to do this, then just put DRS in all the long straights, every straight, and then all of a sudden, the presumption is the logical knock-on effect would be passing it just about every straight possible, right?
Because I know there was a couple of races where they had double DRS zones, but it was only one activation zone.
Yeah, right.
So if the person couldn't make the pass, they could try and make it in the second DRS zone. I think that's definitely going to go away.
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the race. It ends up at the top, Max Verstappen at Red Bull in P1, Sergio Perez in P4. Perez converted his first ever pole and Mexico's first ever pole, vicariously, into an early lead. And honestly, to me, looked very comfortable out front. He had mitigated the DRS impact, was running very smoothly up until that very first stop. Now, Ferrari called for Charles to box, and Perez then boxed while Charles stayed out. Clearly, they told Charles box, but do the opposite of what Perez is doing. Charles said this was a bit of a dummy call to force Red Bull's hand. So it was a big impact. at that point in time, you're thinking, okay, well, if he boxed, could Charles make the undercut or could he make the undercut? Difficult to know, but it was all pretty much neutered at that point because this safety car came out a lap later, giving both the Ferraris a free pit stop. This dropped Sergio back to fourth. That's where he finished. His misfortune actually was that safety car, and you felt bad, Paul, because there's some question of, well, had the safety car not come out, could Sergio have stayed out in front of that Ferrari and won the race? And difficult to know. I think it would have been a little difficult for him to hang on, but hard to know.
Yeah, no, it is hard to know. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, just couldn't have been timed worse for that guy,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a game they were playing, I think, with Red Bull, enticing them into making a pit stop or not making a pit stop. Either way, they had to activate something to make a change, right?
Yeah, right.
So they threw that out there and see whatever Red Bull does. Let's just get something going, get some movement on the track,
right?
And ultimately couldn't have played better for him at all, with the yellow flag and basically Charles, had a free pass and ran with it for most of the race, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Pretty
and
impressive.
Sergio, at that point was just trying to hang on. Had that moment at the safety car line after the virtual safety car, felt maybe that he was ahead of Carlos. He wasn't. Had to let Carlos back by.
Yeah, that was a shame. I that line was pretty late.
Yeah,
that safety car. I would have thought Sergio was safe in third place there, but obviously the line did not lie, and that's where the line was. And the cat and mouse after that was interesting about when Sergio was going to give up that spot.
Right.
Obviously, we're not privy to conversations, if there are even conversations allowed now about this kind of stuff. But I think they held out as long as they could, which is a smart move to help Max on the restart, and then just allow Sainz to take the spot back, and then Sergio trying to get on with his race and try and fight back.
Yeah, right. Well, Sergio's misfortune becomes Max's fortune, if you will, as he was now left battling Charles for the lead. And having saved his tires a little bit, there was a little team, communication saying, let Charles kind of run out there and wear his tires out and manage your tires. He did that, which seems antithetical sometimes to Max's modus operandi. But he had saved his tires after the virtual safety car period. Then he set about attacking Charles, playing DRS detection zone, showcase showdown at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yes, on this episode, who's gonna break latest? Yeah, it was crazy.
That lockup had me worried though, because when he locked up, I'm like, oh man, you may be playing that game a little too hard.
Yeah, you'd think it's flat spotted at that point, right?
Yeah.
So he wasn't going to get hung out. He got stung in Bahrain by Charles, and so he wasn't going to get hung out, and pretty much played that trick to the T. Like last week, the two traded places a few times, but Max quickly caught on, and both jammed the brakes hard, trying not to be the first over the detection zone, and so at that point, it was just DRS down the main straight. In the end, Max won out. To be honest, I think their straight line, low drag setup had more pace in sectors 2 and 3, with Ferrari's higher downforce package giving them the upper hand in sector 1. It was challenging for Max to get close to that Ferrari in sector 1 to make the move on Leclerc. But once he did, I think at that point, he was just focused on staving off the Ferrari in Sector 1 and then pulling out on Sector 2 and Sector 3 and kind of leaving Charles back there. So, but it was kind of an interesting setup in that situation, Paul, where you did have that Red Bull, what they have was it 13, 14 kilometers an hour faster down those long straights than the Ferrari. So that Ferrari trimmed out for high downforce. That Sector 1 was theirs. But that Red Bull Sector 2, Sector 3, it was interesting to see how that played out.
Yeah, ultimately that game didn't work out for Ferrari. I still feel, even if it went to the last lap and Charles was still ahead, like Max was in that same position, I still think Max would have gone by. I still think he had enough in him. So, you could go back and forth. Well, how could Charles played it? I think he played it as well as he could, but ultimately he had to give way to the speed of the Red Bull, who was able to then make good enough gap where it was able to protect the lead in the last couple of laps.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Ferrari and kind of how they managed that. Ferrari had Charles Leclerc in P2, Carlos Sainz at P3. Charles held on to Perez at the start, kept him within a second or two, didn't let the race get out of hand for the first part of the race. But then the first pit stop dupe, which was called but not taken, allowed him to stay out for the overtake. Now, this turns into a brilliant stroke of luck, because he didn't need to work hard for the overtake, because the Latifi-inspired safety car came out. That allowed both Charles and Carlos to stack their stops, got free stops, and in the case of Charles Leclerc, this basically took the lead of the race at that point. Charles had the race in hand, but Max engaged some smooth running for tire preservation, and then after the virtual safety car session, Charles was pretty much left defending Max and trying to hold him off in that Sector 2 and Sector 3. Ultimately, Charles got back by Max twice as they went back and forth, but the third time Max made the pass stick, and Leclerc settled for second. But he did get first or fast lap honors, though, Paul.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it was. I think Charles is living on the edge there. He's still got that gap on his teammate, which is, you can kind of see he takes a bit more risk. He's ready to put it out there. He enjoyed the battle, obviously. He played it as well as he could with the tool he had. I said maybe just a touch under pace on the Red Bulls, but what a start to Ferrari and Leclerc. I mean, how inspirational must that be for them going forward compared to where they've been the past couple of years? So they're doing, Ferrari and both the drivers doing a heck of a job getting the most out of it, and whatever they did in the off season or the preseason or the whole last year is paying bountiful at this point.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, it's been 2 weeks on the trot for Carlos Sainz, been on the podium, right? Mm-hmm. Second and third now. But for 2 weeks, he's still not happy about it.
No, Charles, just Carlos, he's got a little bit of a different approach to Charles, right? Because Charles will hang it out there. We've seen him make a couple of mistakes at Monaco when he got the pole, etc. In, was it practice 2 or 3 here? Just a little issue. Carlos, I think he's one of the drivers that's going to build up his speed and build up that confidence. In the end, I got a feeling he's going to be a match for Charles. He's not quite there yet, but I think the way Carlos builds up his repertoire and his understanding of the car and what he can extract for it, and maybe Charles goes over that and is willing to risk that.
Yeah,
I think Carlos is going to have some good days here in the near future.
Yeah, I was curious. I got to thinking about that a little bit after the race, and I was thinking, okay, so this is 2 weeks on the trot. He's been on the podium, second and third. He held Sergio off after some of that confusion we talked about the virtual safety car and the line. He comes home in third place, and then isn't that jazzed about it. And I got to thinking about it, and I totally agree with you, Paul. It feels like he works up to the limit to get there, whereas Charles jumps in and immediately goes to the limit, sometimes over, right? And I was curious about that, and there's a part of me, Paul, that wonders if Carlos knows the story here. And by that, I mean he knows that F1 is a very fickle sport. And right now, in this moment, it looks like Ferrari is peaking and has a chance of not only winning races, but potentially winning a title. And in his mind, this is his best chance to win the championship. But he hasn't had an answer for Charles yet, or Max, right?
Right.
And so knowing how fleeting these kinds of advantages can be within Ferrari or any team in Formula One, not going off of Mercedes, which, pummeled the grid for 8 years, but how fleeting this can be. And he knows this is a big chance to win a championship, and he just isn't quite there with Charles, and I think that's frustrating for him.
It is frustrating, but I think it's his approach, and his approach is always used. So I think he'll. It's never going to make you feel good if you get beaten by your teammate. But as I said, I think he'll shake it off and I think he will get closer and go beyond a few times. So we're just gonna have to see how by mid-season how it's shaked out. But I'm not worried about Carlos right now.
No.
I think his approach could be a benefit in the future, especially if we see Charles and Max battling each other.
Yeah.
Right. If we see them really getting together and maybe having some issues, then Carlos is going to be the beneficiary.
Yeah.
We didn't see that when Hamilton and Max, Bottas wasn't there to take advantage of their dilemmas, right? So, but
Right.
I think Carlos will be right there, and so he needs to make hay while the sun shines, when those guys are battling out with each other or even taking each other out. Who knows what's going to happen? Yeah.
Yeah, everybody knows I'm a Ferrari fan, and I'm elated, obviously, with the reversal of fortune. There is that part, though, also, Paul, in that, Ferrari for the last 3, 4, 5 years has been nursing some poor performance and difficult years and lots of changes and all the, and it is different from a team management and a team strategy position when all of a sudden you're a team that's winning races and can potentially going for the championship. It's one thing to get your drivers comfortable and on the limit and doing well in the cars. But boy, all of a sudden, this isn't Ferrari kind of trundling around hoping they beat McLaren. This is Ferrari having to come with their absolute A game on par with Red Bull, Mercedes, and anyone else who wants to fight up there with strategy and everything else.
Yeah, and I think drivers will not take their little holidays together as often this year, or as the season evolves around,
Right.
either. So rightfully so.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton down in P10, George Russell in P5. George had an early battle with Magnussen, but after that, he was kind of driving his own race at that point. And given the complex issues at Mercedes, this was actually a decent result from him as sort of best of the rest category. Now, if there's an upside in the Mercedes story for George, personally, it's that he beat his teammate, and that's great. But George said it was one of the most physically demanding races he's ever raced, and said that they just lack downforce and the porpoising issue because they can't run that close to the ground. But having said that, you're always measured against your teammate, and in George's case, tragically, your teammate happens to be, a 7-time world champion, so that's a tall order for George. But on the balance of it, P5, not bad, given where the struggles that Mercedes are having.
Yeah, on the balance of it, you got to separate the seasons at this point, but we know that they are struggling. I think there's more potential in the car if they can solve these issues, and they can be up there fighting. But for him to be third best team out there, I think is actually a positive for the team. They've made some strides forward.
Yeah.
Odd that, Russell could out-qualify Hamilton, which kind of put Lewis on the back foot the whole weekend and could not recover from that kind of, he doesn't have the tool to fight all the way to the front anymore.
Right.
And we saw that in the fishing results. So Russell did the best he could and got the most out of the car. And the team, once again, I'm sure, are working day and night to try and solve those issues, because they need to do it very quickly. Yeah.
Well, you talk about Lewis, he said that they kind of went down a different path on the setup in his car, and that left him out in Q3 in qualifying, or Q1 in qualifying, and that was difficult. So he started down in 15th. Then they chose Paul. Well, they said he's down 15th. Let's put the hard tire on, try to go for that long first stint. That didn't, they didn't box him during the safety car, kind of favoring track position, trying to get him up there.
Well, didn't they miss the entry?
Well, that was a virtual safety car. Yeah. And that, actually not boxing him under the safety car and having that long first stint may have actually worked a little bit anyway. But he missed out on boxing during the virtual safety car, and this dropped him back.
The first safety car, they were kind of handcuffed. They were on the hards. They couldn't go onto anything other than hards at that point. And with the rules being you had to run an alternate tire, they had to stay out. They were just hopeful and staying out that something similar would happen, which it did. But when it did, the reaction by the team was a little bit late. As we see or hear the the communication between the driver and the team, and I don't know how the timing is versus how it really is, you know. So yeah, it's hard to fault them because I'm not looking at the map in real time when they're making these calls, etc. But missing the open pit when they had the chance was pretty much scuppered his race and the chance to get any more points than the one he ended up with.
Yeah, and it is tough because it just so happens that came out because cars were parked at pit entry. You know?
Yeah.
You know, had they been parked on the backside, you know, in sector 2 or something, then it wouldn't probably have been that issue, and he could have dove into the pits.
Yeah, the dreaded lap 36. What the hell happened there?
Yeah, this
Crazy.
is brutal. So, you know, not Lewis's fault, but so with medium compounds on, though, he did side his way back through the field, got up to 10th, and got into the point. And I think Lewis said 10th. I mean, is there even a point for that? Lewis said that the balance of his car
Who is this France Toast guy anyways?
Who is that France Toast? Yeah, my Formula One, what do I do? So Lewis said the balance of his car was better in the race, and perhaps full fuel kind of helped that. Maybe with the weight, it was a little better, but the unlucky virtual safety car period sort of spoiled that. You know, look, trust me, folks, I've been there as a Ferrari fan, all right? It is tough. And any of you Fernando Alonso fans out there, you'll know, right? The 2005, 2006, you're on a high. He's winning a championship with a row. Woo! You know, everything's great. But nothing does last forever in Formula One. And they were, people were moaning about the dominant Ferrari. Schumacher wins everything for 4 years. And then they were moaning, oh my gosh, Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull for 4 years. This has been 8 years of Mercedes, right? That is unparalleled. What a feat that is. But things happen. And it isn't easy to be a Lewis fan or a Mercedes fan and to watch them, struggle, and that's not easy. And it wasn't easy for Red Bull fans, when Vettel was there. It wasn't easy for Ferrari fans, but it's the evolution of the sport. It happens. Wasn't easy for McLaren fans either after Mika's titles. So it's difficult, but the other thing, Paul, is I'm not convinced that Toto fielded a crap car here. I'm not convinced of that. Now, while I don't think that it's a simple fix, like they're like, oh, wait, we didn't turn this switch on. That's what it was. It's not that. And I don't think it's a silver bullet. But I do think there's two things at play here. If it is just down to the porpoising and they can't get the car low enough to get the downforce and heat in the tires, as soon as they solve that thing, you could see a significant improvement, right? And you think last year, they hit the ground running, kind of struggling at the beginning of the year. They turned that around, right? Yeah. And this team is not to be discounted at all, I think, at your own risk.
No, so I think they will solve it. They will solve it. I don't know how long it's going to take. It could be an evolution or a light switch, probably not. But all the pieces that go together on the car to make it a balanced, fine machine.
Right.
They're gonna have to read a lot of numbers.
Yep.
We're just gonna have to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Sorry, folks. Paul cut out a little bit there, so I don't know what happened there, but apologies.
That's because I was swearing. There was a lot of swearing going on.
A lot of swearing, a lot of arm waving, maybe. That's always difficult for, streaming on your 33K modem. It's always tough. So,
yes. Still cutting it.
Yes, you are. Yeah. All right. Let me tee up the second one, and we'll see if Paul's still around here for us. All right. So here we go. Let's talk about Alpine, Paul. Fernando Alonso, a DNF. Esteban Ocon, a P6. If they wanted more TV time for their sponsor, well, they absolutely got that. Alpine letting their rivals battle each other early on. And at some level, this sort of allowed the Alfa Romeo of Bottas to sort of lope past Ocon, unfortunately. So at one end, you're thinking, okay, this is fun and entertaining. They're letting them both go at it hammer and tongs, and they're getting a lot of TV time, and that's great. On the flip side, you did allow Bottas to kind of reel them both in at that point. And then when they decided, okay, for Ocon, they kind of told him to hold station. At that point, he was kind of a sitting duck for Bottas. Fernando seemed to be the one that was a bit quicker, ultimately. Sort of won out on that battle. I kind of feel like at some point, maybe they should have let him just kind of run and hold station earlier. They didn't. That was their choice. A lot of people appreciated that. Ocon said he had a nice battle with Alonso. Alonso was quicker. I think the DRS happy zone allowed Ocon to get back by Alonso, right? When technically had Alonso made that pass and they didn't have that, he may not have got back around him. But anyway, went back and forth. And that was kind of it. But unfortunately, Alonso ends up parking on pit lane entry with a car power and said something about heat and on his steering wheel. So that was the end of his race for a DNF. That was unfortunately. And Ocon ends up getting in a drag race down the the front straight, Paul, in the last lap with Lando Norris and takes P6.
Yeah, I didn't like what they were doing there with the Alpines. They're not in that place right now.
Yeah.
We've talked about it before that when the team is not quite there, they all need to work together for the better result of the team ultimately at the end of the race. And I think the battling, the squabbling between the two, as fun as it may have been to watch, for me was kind of painful from a team perspective. If I'm on my team and I've seen my two cars fighting it out there, and I can see Bottas driving away and I can see Bottas catching either way, I think it's a dumb move by the team. I mean, they need to be more rigid with what their goals are and their opportunities. It could have been a fifth place. I don't know. I think it could have been for them if they'd worked together. I mean, what would have been more fun for me from a team side is them using DRS and just pulling themselves further up the road. Instead, they use DRS to fight themselves further back on the road, which is complete negative to what the team's goal is. The drivers are team drivers. They're not paying to drive. They're being paid to drive. So they need to do what's best for the team. Ultimately, you don't want to thwart a driver in his competitive edge, but you definitely want to get everyone back on the same page and say, when we have the opportunity, we need to figure out how to work together and not fight and squabble, because that cost them multiple seconds on the racetrack, which put them in a different position for the rest of the race.
Yeah, for sure. I think if it was me, I would have let Alonso by. And if Alonso couldn't pull away and wasn't much quicker, then just reverse it later on. But I think you'd have been better off in doing that and trying to gain and keep Bottas behind.
I think that was the problem with the DRS fight back option.
It was.
That even though Ocon wasn't as fast, he could at least get himself ahead of Alonso just to cause havoc for another lap.
Right.
And ultimately, the team should have said, because we heard it on the radio later on, hold station. They should have called it from the beginning and just said, hold station. Let's just ride together up to the next car in front, and let's not allow us to be clawed back into the battle behind us. Yeah,
because what you're really seeing there is two cars now that can run close together, close enough to where that DRS is giving Ocon that artificial boost that while Alonso's quicker, it was enough that he could just get right back by him, and it created this back and forth that, quite honestly, I don't think the team needed. I agree with you. McLaren, Lando Norris, P7, Dan Ricciardo, DNF. It was a better week, and maybe it answered a question I had about McLaren as to if we might see maybe something a little more track specific in their performance gains, right? And deficits, quite honestly. And perhaps we will. I don't know. This seemed to be a better track for the McLaren than Bahrain was. Dan struggled early, but he stopped before anyone else. And then once he came out, he had actually a pretty tidy race going up in the points and ahead of his teammate. But he stopped at the pit entry along with Alonso with loss of power. That put paid to his race. This left Lando also fighting his way up to the top 10. And he was even handy enough to sniff for P6. And if Dan hadn't had those issues, I kind of feel like they had every chance of being a dual points finish for McLaren, which is quite a departure from what they did in Bahrain. So, while, yes, they weren't fighting for best of the rest and they weren't fighting for wins, I think you got to take these small victories. Having no DNF with Dan, I think he'd had a dual points finish. I think Lando up in P7, not too bad. I don't think they can walk away from the weekend feeling horrible.
No, I mean, as dire as it was for the first race and preseason testing, it's actually a massive jump.
Yeah.
For them to be fighting out for the mid of the top 10, that's a big deal, They've solved some problems. We think some of them are track specific. They may not, maybe, and then they've maybe come to understand a little bit and they're coming to it. They're a little behind because they obviously weren't allowed to develop their car as much as they'd wanted to. So this is definitely a step forward in the right direction. And I think now they can maybe get back to maybe fighting for that fourth best team on the grid. I think, Ferrari are kind of, well, I guess fighting with Mercedes is where they need to be now. And they may get there fairly soon.
Yeah, that's right. This would be, Ferrari, Red Bull, front best of the rest really could boil down McLaren, Mercedes, which would be an interesting battle. AlphaTauri, Pierre Gasly, P8, Yuki Tsunoda at DNS. Did not start. A tough weekend for Yuki. Lost power on the way to the grid. Couldn't make it to the starting line and had DNS. And after missing qualifying, it was brutal. This reliability gremlin is starting to hurt pretty bad for Yuki. This left Pierre holding the baton for the team. He got hung out by the safety car like Perez did, but he did manage to fight his way back into the top 10. Fought off Magnussen and Hamilton on fresher tires. That's no easy thing to do. So a good run for Pierre. And he said that he was having serious intestinal issues for the last 15 laps, but overall felt a lot more comfortable in the car this weekend. So this portion of the broadcast brought to you by our friends at Gas X for those unmentionable moments.
I think it was a bit more than Gas X.
Yeah,
it sounded like anyway. Hopefully he's okay, and it's not nothing more serious.
No kidding.
I think he's grabbing intestines out of his, that's what it feels like. But so hopefully it's nothing more. We haven't heard anything extra from it, so hopefully he's recovering well. But you got to think of the G-forces you're involved in there. The belts are super tight. Just every time you brake, every time you accelerate, every time you hit a bump, it's got to be brutal. So for him to get on and finish the race was a mighty feat, I would say, for Gasly, and good that he's getting the car more competitive. But just to get points out of it, that's a real good thing for someone having to brutally go through that at the end of the race.
Yeah, no doubt. Haas F1, Mick Schumacher, DNS, Kevin Magnussen, P9. So a massive shunt during qualifying for Mick that pretty much totaled the car, cut it in half. Thankfully, he was okay. But the team chose not to start him on Sunday, just, to keep an eye on him. He took a, 50, 60, 70 G shunt, massive, into the wall. And the team, I think Gunther said, look, at this point, any future damage you might have on Sunday, that would really put us on the back foot for Australia. So we're just going to wait, build the new car for Australia, go to Australia, try to, forget about this and move forward. But very scary, Paul.
Yeah, very, very scary. He doesn't like this track very much. He had a big one last year, and which wasn't very long ago, obviously, and this one as well. That's the nature of this super high speed street circuit. When things go wrong, you're traveling in a great amount of speed, and everything goes wrong very, very quickly. And it definitely showed in the replays. How quickly that can happen to him. So I feel bad for him. Hopefully, it's going to be tough for him to come back to this track, quite honestly, with the issues he's had, because it can put a little brick wall in your head and won't be able to squeeze the most. But I'm sure he'll be very happy to move on to a track that's fairly fast still, but the walls are a little further away. So
yeah. Kevin started in the hard compound. It looked like he maybe thereabouts, but the safety car hit him like it did Sergio. This left him fighting to get back into the points, which he did do. Kevin said that he wasn't too keen about their hard compound strategy. He didn't really like it that much. Thought that was that hobbled him, and then that didn't help him. Nor did the safety car at that point. Very much like Lewis. In that case. So Kevin did benefit from the virtual safety. Unlike Lewis, Kevin did benefit from the virtual safety car, though, jumped in, got new tires on, fresh tires. He came back out, was able to fight back into the points of P9. He said that had that in his mind, had that been a full safety car, and I was wondering about that as it was unfolding, if that shouldn't be a full safety car, because they did have marshals on that pit entry pushing cars. But anyway, he felt like had that been a full safety car with those fresh tires, he thinks they would have been definitely up for more points. Yeah, and he said that the car was a joy to drive.
Yeah, I mean, he's having fun with that thing.
Yeah.
He's not one to be delicate with a tire, is Magnussen.
Yeah.
So, he'd be better off for a couple of pit stops and throw soft tires and just let him attack.
Yeah.
He's definitely an attacking driver. And so, yeah, it must be a bit painful him having to run that strategy. I think, ultimately that strategy wasn't going to work for anybody.
No.
But that's certainly the way the race evolved anyway. But it's great to see that the Haas is a fine car to drive, and he's making the most of it. I mean, Mick's going to get his day soon enough as well, but Magnussen's bringing in the points and lifting that team up. So really fun to watch him dicing it out, and the car is very handy. I mean, it's right up there. So
it is.
They're not lucking into a position at all. So the car is fast, and I believe it's probably going to be fast all year on. They got their sums right.
Yeah, exactly. Alfa Romeo, Valtteri Bottas in DNF, Zhou Guanyu P11. Valtteri qualified well, Paul, and had a good race going, honestly, with some nice battles against the Alpines. He got by them. I had a good battle with Kevin Magnussen. I doubt very much, Paul, that Valtteri thought that losing his Mercedes seat would mean that he would be beating Mercedes this year. He was closing in on Alonso when the team boxed him and then DNF. That was truly unfortunate for Valtteri, but he was having a very good race up into that point.
Yeah, no, it is a quick car. It's like the Haas. It's seems very comfortable out there to drive and to drive to the limit. And Valtteri's taking that, qualifying well, racing well, being able to fight through the pack. As you mentioned, last race, it's not really something we'd known Bottas has to be able to do. He used to get stuck and mired back there for a long time when some issues came up. And Zhou still did a great job. I mean, had a big issue at the start. So to come all the way back up to P11 with that actually a good finish for him. He's not making mistakes. I think it was a technical issue that put him where he was all the way back there. Basically went back to last and had to fight his way back up. But he also is showing that the Alfa Romeo is very raceable and has some good pace throughout the race.
That's exactly right. He had that time penalty for overtaking Albon off track. He didn't give the spot back. Unfortunately, when he did box, there was confusion over it was a bad jack or whatever it was, or whatever it was. And because the team went into damage limitation mode because they had a bum jack, they didn't serve the entire penalty, and so then they gave him a drive-through penalty. So then he drives through, it puts him to the back again. But let's be honest, as you said, penalty and DNF corrected. This team was heading for a dual points finish, and that's really good for Zhou. On such a demanding track to be up there in P11, I think both these Alfa Romeos would have been in the points, a dual point.
Yeah, and Zhou didn't race there last year, right?
No,
a lot of these people raced it just a few months ago. So I think he's doing a great job. And
I do too.
Kimmy's probably regretting leaving at this point. So,
yeah, exactly.
Because there really actually is a car to fight with right now.
Yeah, exactly. So good for Zhou. I think he's doing a fabulous job so far.
Yep.
Aston Martin, Lance Stroll P13, Nico Hülkenberg P12. Hulk started on the hard compounds, got hung out by the safety car like the other hard compound runners. And that scuttled their long run strategy. Hulk boxed, but he struggled to get back through the field and slotted into P12 ahead of Lance, though. And that was pretty much their race. Lance said he tried his best, Paul, but he also boxed before the safety car. And then he had that late race tangle, which quite honestly wasn't Lance's fault. I mean, he was closing the door and Albon wasn't lifting, and they came together and he dropped from 11th back to 13th after that.
Yeah. Yeah, the car just isn't there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he was trying everything he could, but
Yeah.
we know if he does have the right car, he can be fairly well. But yeah, they're really struggling with that car. I think as much as Mercedes is, I think they got similar problems.
You remember that year
oddly enough,
that they just pretty much took a picture of the Mercedes and designed their
Yeah.
car like maybe they did that this year. They
it was a
shouldn't
bad
have. I don't
idea
know.
to do it this year.
Yeah, it was a bad idea to do it this year. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's talk about Williams. Alex Albon DNF, Nicholas Latifi DNF. This is a race to forget for Williams, but they do need to get on top of this Latifi issue, folks.
Yeah.
This has got to be solved. If you consider his cash backing that he's bringing to the team, that's great. But now with a cost cap, no matter how much cash he's bringing to the team, there's only so much they can spend, right? And they have to weigh this situation, and he's starting to cost them a lot of money on track and in the machine shop. So this Latifi thing is getting a little out of hand, and I think, Yost has got to be looking at this. Albon made that lunge on Stroll late in the race. Was it there? Probably not. I mean, let's call it an opportunistic move. And he retired with a puncture. So bad weekend for Williams.
Yeah, the Latifi situation. I see a pace car driver, safety car driver future for him because basically he causes them all, so he might as well just jump right out and jump in the safety car and double dip on the weekend and make some extra cash. But it's I mean I don't think we saw Latifi as the second coming of Fangio when he came in. Had better hopes for him.
But he's kind of going backwards.
He is going backwards, and it kind of psychologically, it just becomes worse and worse. And I don't know if this is not going to affect since of the last race last year with the death threats and he crashed, and but once these things start to go mentally, you start to grip the wheel a little tighter. You have a little doubt in your mind. The race, the corner, don't flow as easy because you're subconsciously, even consciously thinking about what mistake you made last time, and it just adds to the mistakes. Really, you got to throw those out there. You've got to run underneath that radar of self-doubt, and I think that might be affecting him somehow, which is unfortunate. So hopefully he can wrestle his way out of it. He's a decent and quick enough driver on occasionally, but we don't need to see Latifi and safety car go hand in hand every race this year. That's brutal.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he doesn't have to pick up the Mazepin role.
No.
And that's unfortunate. All right,
I wonder who's causing all the safety cars. He's not crashing with other people.
I need to find. Yeah, I wish I had it. I wonder what's causing all the safety cars there. It's not.
He's making mistakes on his own. That's the difference, right? Maldonado, we saw him just crashing into people, But Latifi is literally running on his own and making mistakes, which is different.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's give away some awards. The first one is always move of the race. All right, Paul, who'd you have move of the race? Same as mine?
I think so. I got to give it to the tussle there at the end, the DRS duel, so to speak, and obviously giving it to Max for finally executing the last pass that made the win possible.
Right. Yeah, that's what I had too. The next award is donkey of the race.
We'll do it live!
All right, Paul.
Well, it usually goes very close to the last team we talk about usually because there's something happened that didn't cause the DNF, and unfortunately we're going to go right back to the Canadian Nicholas to
Oh man, that's not good.
Safety car causing incidents.
Yeah, well, that's a worthy recipient of the donkey. I agree. This week, my donkey is going to be the TV production crew.
Ooh, that's a great one. I've got something to say about that.
Do you? Yeah, the amount of replays cutting over the live actual passing that's going on.
People jumping out. Yay. Oh, then a pass happened?
Yeah.
But she's jumping around.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, so now I'm going to try to have some deference here because they so Max comes up and passes Charles. And they're thinking, okay, great. And it's going down into sector 1, sector 2, and they're in sector 3. And they're thinking, okay, let's go show a replay of the pass because that was really cool. But this year, they're going to immediately pass right back, and the cars are racing closer together. So you don't have the luxury of time anymore, just
Things
to
are
run.
happening fast. We don't need the replay to keep it interesting.
Yeah, I don't need the replay of the first pass because the third pass is already happening on track. Go show me the second and third pass, right? So I'm trying to have some deference here. It's not an easy job, and I'm not, taking the mick, but it was pretty bad this weekend.
Yeah. Well, so you're talking about the video. I'm going to talk about, because we watched 2 different feeds at this point.
Oh yeah, I watched the Sky.
You're watching the Sky one, and I'm watching the F1 TV one, which now had Will and Joylan Palmer as commentators, and the various other backup experts. And something I found very common, that everyone is doing a really bad Captain Kirk impression to add suspense to the race. Let's take a look at the action. Can you please just talk in a fluid manner in one sentence?
Somehow
we got to get. Is he dead, Jim? It's like infuriating. They're all like feeding on each other, and these pauses is driving me insane. Jordan Palmer's okay. He's my favorite on there because he actually talks in a regular sentence.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a nice pass. But we'll know the other guy, I can't remember his name, just annoying the crap out of me. And I don't know. I'm watching it the opposite one of you, just so we can obviously talk to everybody out there, because everyone's all watching different feeds.
Yeah.
I may just go with the Spanish cast next
there
time,
you go,
because there's fluidity to that the talking never stops,
right?
But
it never stops. What is
Sergio doing? Please,
damn it, Jim, I'm a race car broadcaster, not an extra on Star Trek.
Please rewatch the show, Will, and critique yourself, and let's just
there you go. No dramatic pauses. Yeah.
Please.
There you go.
Please.
All right, and then finally, we always have drive of the race. Oh yeah.
Yes.
All right, Paul. Who did you have?
I'm going to give it to Max. It was a tough battle with Charles, and Charles is not an easy guy to overtake, as we saw, but Max made a couple of mistakes, figured it out. Yeah, he had maybe a slightly sharper tool to play with, but he made sure he got the job done, didn't clash with anyone, solid points for the championship, which is something he really needs to stay in touch.
And I think he also slipped in some good tire management in there too, that nobody really thought about.
Right, where you're meaning. I think it's important is how you treat these tires at the beginning of the stint.
Yes.
Those first 5 laps can really show itself later on in the stint.
And a lot of people critical about, Mac being impatient and petulant and all that sort of stuff. He was managing his tires, and it paid dividends in the end. So I got to give him props on that. He's
got a very good understanding of racing in general.
Yeah,
he understands a lot of things.
Yeah, as a Ferrari guy, as much as I hate to see Ferrari not take the win, because trust me, I would want that, but I got to give Max some props on that one. That was well done. So, all right, let's do some mailbag.
You've got mail.
All right, Mr. Drury, right up front, I'm going to tell you, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm sure one of our listeners might. So Mr. Drury asks, I went back and rewatched Drive to Survive from the start and the most recent. Something caught my eye I didn't notice before. When the drivers exit their cars, they put a puck-sized thing on the car before getting out, as this is usually but not always followed by the steering wheel. So there's something that comes out on front and then the steering wheel comes out. And I've seen that. You're right. I've seen that several times for certain drivers, but not all drivers. There are other drivers that don't do that. And I've never really dug into it, but I recall seeing it. I just don't recall, like if it's a safety ring that goes around the yoke or something that prevents maybe something happening to the steering wheel on the back. I don't know if it's something on the back of the wheel that they take off and then disconnect the wheel. But it's
maybe
a really
it's one of those find my wallet things.
It could be.
The little Apple, find my wallet just in case.
You know
Just
what
in
it
case.
could be, Paul, and they're not sponsors of ours. They should be. It could be the WeatherTech cup holder that he's pulling out of there, right?
Yes.
I'm looking at you, WeatherTech.
Yes.
Paul, go down the paddock and tell the WeatherTech boys I just talked about and promoted their stuff when you get
Okay.
to Long Beach.
Okay. But
Say,
that means
oi!
his son will have to appear on the podcast because
Ah, okay.
his
Well,
daddy buys him race
yeah.
teams.
Oh, no, that's how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Funny how that works.
Funny.
All right. But great question. So if you guys are at home or listening and you do know the answer, put it in the comment sections of the podcast post or our website, theparkferme.com, because I haven't really dug into it and found that out. But you're absolutely right. I've seen him do that. Not all, but some.
Because we don't have Atticus to look this up anymore. He left.
I know. He left. Yeah, I know. Gonna have to find new interns. Eric asks, okay, Todd, Paul, Grace, love the podcast. Thanks, Eric. Been listening for a few years. Thank you for that. Sorry you're enduring that this long. I have a question about the Mercedes engine and the new regulations. If the engine is down on power, like the Ferrari was for the last few years, can Mercedes do anything to fix it? I thought for the next 4 years, the engines were frozen in performance gains and could only be modified for reliability problems. Thanks and keep up the great work. Well, Eric, this for me is a critical question. I think the big question for me is, and one that I think Ferrari, Renault, and Red Bull are going to be keeping a very, very close eye on this. Because if, and it's a big if the Mercedes is legitimately down on power from the other engines and the power units is frozen, they are allowed a, quote, reliability upgrade. But I gotta think the other teams are going to want to watch that very closely on what exactly the reliability upgrade is. If I was Ferrari Renault, I would be hounding the FIA about what exactly Mercedes is trying to fix in reliability, because Mercedes pretty crafty team over there. Not that they do anything untoward, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that aside, obviously that is an option. We've seen reliability upgrades that just happen to become a performance upgrade at the same time. Yeah. It's just but as our time with Shell, remember,
Yep.
There's a lot of things. The lump is the lump, but there's a lot of things that feed that lump that make it perform well.
Yep.
So we know fuel is obviously a big one.
And lubricants.
And yep, fuel. So fuel first, because they changed the fuel rules. So the fuel rules, there's probably a bigger margin to gain right now because they did change the fuel rules a little bit. Yep. So perhaps, doesn't mean that they can find an advantage over Shell and everyone else, but there is an opportunity there where they can gain some speed back. Lubricants, absolutely. We found out a lot about lubricants when we went through that Shell deal to find out how much performance can come out. It's not just about keeping things slippery. There's a lot to be gained, and they gained a lot, maybe a little too much when we saw what happened with Ferrari. You know, they worked pretty hard, and they found some good performance upgrades. But
they sure did in 2019.
Yeah, it went over the edge just a wee bit. And then you got packaging. You know, we're talking about heat. You know, how does the air come in? You need air. You need to keep everything cool. There's all kinds of different ways the aerodynamics can actually bring into the engine. We've seen Mercedes have to turn the engines down due to overheating at some points in the previous past. Is that something they can solve to allow them to turn the engines up all the way because they're able to feed them enough cooling without being a detriment to aerodynamics? So there's other ways to do it apart from just changing the internals. There's a lot of stuff on the outside that also feeds to that performance of the engine, allow it to do what it does.
Yeah, somebody had asked me on the website on the race review that I did, the race report, that they were reading and thought that somebody had intimated that maybe Mercedes and Petronas, they were having real fuel concerns and issues. And my response was very much like yours, Paul. Now, I haven't worked with ExxonMobil, or we'd love to. We haven't done that, but we have worked with Shell, and I got to be honest with you. If anyone knows how to do something with fuel and E10, it's Shell. There's just, Paul and I have been to several things with Shell. We learned a hell of a lot about Shell and their fuel. And remember, we
wouldn't let them leave. We bugged the hell out of them.
We bugged the hell out of them over dinner. Remember Sebastian Vettel? I asked him, And he said, well, to be fair, Total and everybody, they all do a really good job, but Shell's just at a whole different level,
Yeah.
you know. So when you think of the Ferrari pace right now,
hmm
they don't fool yourself. They're getting a lot of that performance out of their partnership with Shell. That partnership is critical to them. So, and all Ferrari powered cars. So great question. Mike Smith asks, as always, love the podcast. Well, thanks, Mike. We love you too. I recommend it to all my friends. Well, that's awesome. He said both of them. Well, hopefully all three of you listen to the podcast. I have a couple questions unrelated. So he says, first question is Adrian Newey, if you happen to have his number. I don't. In regards, it'd be nice me calling up, yo, Adrian, what's going on, man? I don't have his number. In regards to McLaren's newfound woes, how can changing brake ducts turn a sprightly car into a donkey? I thought ground effect cars would be less prone to effects of minor tweaks. Is this more of an issue with the car not liking Bahrain, as Lando suggested? Well, there's a couple thoughts I have, Paul, and then, correct me where I'm wrong on this, but this could be part of it, given that their pace in Saudi was quite a bit different than Bahrain. So I do think there are track-specific metrics to take into account with McLaren's performance, not all just down to that. And some of this may not just have to do with the brake inlet ducts, right? The whole brake system is now behind a shroud. And so the reason they did that is so they couldn't use the heat coming off the brakes to heat the wheel rims as much, to heat the tire as much, to get heat in the tires, right? So they're trying to control that. And that housing, it could be down to materials. It could be the design of that as well. There's also a question I have about is it the front or the rear brakes they're struggling with? Because I remember, Paul, when they're harvesting energy, that when the teams had an issue with their MGUK, their rear brakes would instantly overheat, right? Because a lot of that braking was happening in the MGUK harvesting, right? And so I don't know. It's difficult to know, but it goes beyond just a simple tweak here.
Yeah, it's not just
redesign.
one little thing. We know one little thing does affect a lot of several other things as well. And obviously where the aero was all over the top of the car, that maybe the percentage was big enough. But yeah, they're not going to tell us what the real issue is.
No.
They can give us a couple of red herrings, just say it's a brake duct. I'm sure it's somewhere deeper than there, maybe in the design of how the brake duct works with everything else. And it's not just, you can just take this one off and throw a new one on. Everything's got to work together. So maybe something, maybe the whole assembly in the front axle has to change. We saw there was a performance gain within a week from,
right.
and I know there wasn't a big change in the car. There just couldn't be. So I think, the track change was probably more a bigger factor than actually what they've actually changed on the car, but they will, believe they know exactly what their issue is, but there's going to have to be a lot of testing and a lot of evolution in parts to actually get them to solve that issue. And that doesn't happen quickly.
And it's not, as Paul mentioned, it's not just the brakes. They are having a lot of porpoising themselves. That's, wreaking havoc as well. So
the intriguing thing is the Mercedes cars that are dealing with it. That's the weird thing to me, is like, they go with the same lump in the back, but how is that?
I know.
Why everyone's having the same issue. So
do you see Toto's face sitting there at the finish? Hell hath no fury like a Toto scorned.
Yeah, he is not.
Don't count him out. I would be an idiot to bet against Mercedes and Lewis and George turning this thing around. So I can't count them out now. Let's see. Second question. Why does F1 seem hell-bent on preventing Michael Andretti from entering the sport? First, the Sauber deal falls through at the ninth hour. Money-strapped Haas won't take his calls. And now a chorus of F1 officials and team owners saying Andretti would water down the sport. Did Michael burn bridges during his stint in F1? Xenophobia, elitism, what is it? I'm not quite sure what the issue is for other teams, other than I got to think maybe the simple answer is they don't want more competition, because I would be surprised if there was sort of any lingering animosity toward Michael from when he was in Formula One
As a
years
driver,
ago.
right?
Yeah, as a driver. Yeah, I don't think there's anything there. I'd be really shocked because most of those players are out. Not all, but most. I suspect it really kind of comes down to, Mike, I suspect it comes down to there's 10 teams and they don't want to split the prize money 11 ways. You know?
Well, the problem is they don't split it 11 ways.
No, it's
Right?
already.
It only goes
yeah.
down to 10. The 11th place team gets nothing, which is
Right.
wrong, but that's the way the rules are.
Yeah.
So if you bring in another team, that means someone is going to completely end up with nothing at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And they've liked this 10 team. We're guaranteed at least this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But that's going to go away with an 11th team added on.
So when they say that it's going to water down the sport, they may mean it's going to water down the prize money.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no watering down sport when
No.
by adding 2 cars to a 20
No.
car grid. You know, that's why we all love NASCAR. There's 43 of them. But
well, Paul, you race on the weekends at Harder Racing at IMSA.
Mhm.
There's 40 some odd cars out there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, multi
Different
cars racing,
classes,
obviously,
but still.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. 60 something at Daytona. It's a lot of cars out there, and that's people love seeing cars racing. And there's that many cars out there. There's always a race going on at every corner.
Yeah. Right.
I think Michael got a reputation during his stay in Formula One as a driver. By not full commitment. Now, you know, he's a whole different person in a whole different role.
He was a lot younger then too.
Yeah, I mean, they did it wrong. I'll tell you that, because the guy had talent that they didn't allow to happen because of their approach. And the only thought I have is that the Andretti's have a lot of success and have a lot of hierarchy here in US racing. They're involved in a lot of projects. They do a lot of things, and maybe their reputation or their thought pattern on how they should or shouldn't be treated, or what they should or should deserve, maybe a little different than how the old guard at Formula One are willing to give up for them.
Yeah, right.
And I think there's probably a middle ground there where both are probably approaching it from a slightly biased angle and preconceptions of who each other are, really.
Yeah. I got to think also, you know, there's a difference when you think, well, Gene Haas wants to come to F1. Okay. So a NASCAR guy wants to start an F1 team, come over and, you know, okay, have a go at it, whatever. But that's a different message and a different concern if you were in F1 and someone said, okay, Roger Penske is going to come to F1.
Yeah.
That's a different deal. Roger, a whole different level, boys.
Mm-hmm.
Whole different level. Can find whole different levels of money, whole different levels of sponsorship. This is a different thing. Roger knows how to win. He's got an ace operation, and Andretti's got a killer operation. They got a nice operations over there in IndyCar. Been doing open wheel their whole lives.
Yeah, well, they're involved in a lot of things. Formula E, the off-road E thing, the rallycross. They've got IMSA team now with Jarrett Andretti driving. Yes, they're involved in a lot of things. I think they're doing too much, mind you, but to take on a Formula One team, I think they'd have to get rid of some of those things to be able to really focus on it properly.
But it tells you they know how to find money.
Yes.
Yeah, Mario can just sniff it out, man.
Yeah, he just ups his day rate.
Yeah, I know what he charges for his speaking engagement, by the way.
That was 10 years ago. God knows.
That was 10 years ago. Imagine what it is now. Yeah. So anyway, all right. And then finally, our dear old friend me from over in the UK asks, hi, guys. With the power units frozen for 4 years from 1st of March, ICE, TC, MGUHC, and lubricant, will you start retiring or referring to the, quote, baked-in advantage that Ferrari has? Well played, me. No, I'm not, Dave, because here's the point. When Ferrari has beaten the entire grid like a narc at a biker rally for the next 3, 4, 5 years, then maybe I will. But Mercedes entered that sport with such a comprehensive second and a half advantage over everyone else. They just led that whole hybrid. It was baked into their recipe for 8 years, you know? So we'll see.
It is one of your favorite sayings, though.
It is one of my, because it's true. They've had that baked in advantage that they could just turn it up when they wanted to and pummel everyone by 9/10 if they wanted to. It's just been, and more power to them. but they wouldn't change the engine formula that everybody could, catch up, and they had the token thing, and so they guarded that baked in dominance, and I have issues with that because I'm a Ferrari fan, right? So I would have issues, but good on them. They made hay, and good on them. So anyway, and I don't think Ferrari has that much of a comprehensive advantage over Red Bull, and so we'll see. And don't say that, because there's always reliability upgrades. So look for those. All right. Well, that does it for this podcast. This is what we think about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Let us know what you think. You can go to theparcfermé.com, share your opinion. Just do it decorum and civility, as always. No personal attacks is what that means. And if you like the podcast, go over to iTunes, give us a good rating. We'd appreciate that. A huge thank you to every one of our Patreon supporters. We could not and would not do this without you. This podcast wouldn't exist. It would have ended many episodes ago. And while there's probably lots of you dancing and singing hallelujah, if that happened, some of you may be disappointed. So thank a Patreon supporter for doing that. And so that's been awesome. We're going to go to Melbourne next in Australia. I haven't been there for a couple of years. So excited about that, right?
Yeah, I'm excited, yeah.
Because Paul, all of our Australian listeners know how much you and I love our Aussie friends.
We do, and how much they love racing. It's been
right.
terrible that they've gone through this whole crisis, and we're going to have a Grand Prix. No, we're not. We're going to have it. No, we're not. I mean, back and forth and back
Brutal.
and forth. So I'm very excited to have F1 back in Australia.
Yes, me too. Very happy about that. So that's it. Paul, good luck at Long Beach.
Thank you very much.
May you guys win. And then next week, I will hunt down Grace. We'll get her thoughts on this. And we'll be back next week to do it all over again. Until that time, this is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camera, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game